Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Hi, this is Arlene and you're listening to Duran ASEAN, the voice of discovery and sharing. Today we are going to talk about an issue that has been quite a huge deal in Southeast Asia. I'm talking about whistleblowers protection. Of course, with me is Andrew MacGregor Marshall. He is well known as the author for the book Kingdom in Crisis. So he's with me now. How are you? All the way from Australia?
Hi Arlene, I'm doing well. How are you?
Oh, I'm great as well. So today you are going to talk about an issue that is, I would say, a controversy, not just in Malaysia, but perhaps in the whole of Southeast Asia region, especially ASEAN itself is being seen as a very close organization when you talk about issues relating to whistleblowers.
Yep, sounds interesting.
So perhaps you can share a bit about your experience, especially after publishing the book Kingdom in Crisis and how it has affected the Thai government in actions towards your life as a, I would say, whistleblower?
Sure. Well, I guess my career as a whistleblower really started back in 2011. Although by that stage I've been a journalist for nearly 20 years, and I think any good journalist is also a whistleblower because it's our job to expose corruption, expose abuse of power, and so on. So I think any good journalist anywhere in the world should consider themselves a whistleblower. But for me, it really started becoming very serious and having real consequences back in 2011. Because that year I got hold of all the WikiLeaks cables, or the cables that there's 250,000 of them about the whole world. They'd been stolen by Bradley Manning, a U.S. soldier who believed that they should be exposed. He gave them to WikiLeaks, and the cables were also shared with some others. So I got hold of them not through WikiLeaks. But I got the cables back in 2011 when I was working as a journalist for Reuters news agency. And I thought it was, of all the different countries, it was useful to focus on Thailand and the Thai cables. Because...
But you have been focusing on Thailand prior to this, right? Prior to...
I'd been based in Thailand and I'd had some, I traveled to Thailand quite often. So it was one of my specialist areas. But the reason I chose to focus on Thailand when I got the cables was because they have a notorious law, the lèse-majesté law, that basically forbids journalists or forbids anybody from speaking honestly about the political situation.
Yeah, in fact, recently there were a mother of two that was being that was prosecuted under that same law because of a Facebook posting.
We've seen two shocking sentences over the past 2 days. One elderly man sentenced to 30 years in jail. His sentence was actually 60 years, but the Thai system is that if you plead guilty, you get a sentence cut by half. So it was 60 years sentence cut to 30 years. We had a young mother with children aged 5 and 7 who's been sentenced to I think, 56 years, cut in half to 28, again for just some Facebook postings about the monarchy. So that shows how serious this law is, and it really stifles debate in Thailand. And it's used by the powerful to really protect themselves from being questioned. So we see this happening in many countries. We've seen the laws of Malaysia being used recently to try to protect some of the powerful. And in Thailand, the lèse-majesté law is what's used. So because of this law, it was actually quite rare a couple of years ago to read anything about, anything honest about the Thai political situation, because nobody wanted to break the law and lose the ability to travel to Thailand. But as far as I'm concerned, you can't understand Thailand's political crisis and the turmoil that we've seen in Thailand over the past few years unless you can talk about the role of the monarchy and the role of the palace. And so one of the reasons a lot of people, I think, find Thailand so confusing is because that part of the story is left out usually. So a huge chunk of the story is missing because people are afraid to tell it. So I wanted to focus on this. I thought the WikiLeaks cables gave me the chance to really shed light on the role of the palace.
And anyone is free to just go through the, thousands of documents in the WikiLeaks data, right?
Yeah, well, back then, they hadn't been published yet. Mm-hmm. They weren't in the public domain. So when I had them, it was one of the things that made it quite exciting. Mm-hmm. None of these, I think only 2 of the cables had been published out of more than 3,000 Thai cables. So when I started going through, they hadn't been published yet, but they're all online now and anyone can see them. But when I started going through them, I could see, I thought it was just really useful because, in my view, Thailand, like any country, needs to, if it wanted to make progress and overcome its political crisis, it has to be transparent. We need to be able to hold senior officials to account and discuss them openly and debate them. And if we can't, debate what senior government officials are doing, that, I don't see how that can ever be a good thing for the people. So that's true of Thailand, it's true of Malaysia, it's true of many other countries. So, I decided that because, this law in Thailand was so severe, I decided that of all the countries of the world that I could focus on when I was looking at the WikiLeaks cables, Thailand would be the most useful because these cables were, showing a whole different reality that journalists normally never wrote about. So I decided, that would be a really valuable thing to do. But obviously, it came at a lot of personal cost. I was a senior journalist for Reuters at that time, mm-hmm. and I'd been working for Reuters for 17 years. And Reuters was reluctant to publish this not because they didn't think the information was correct, but they were worried about breaking Thai law. So my bosses in Reuters told me eventually, first of all, they wouldn't allow me to do this work during office hours. Mm-hmm. So I was going through these 3,000 cables in my spare time.
So
it
becomes like your part-time work instead.
Exactly. I was doing it on my own spare time, and it takes a long time to go through all these thousands of cables. I think that's one reason journalists have not really used the WikiLeaks cables as effectively as they should, because mm-hmm. everybody's kind of searching for 1 or 2 cables of bombshell, some bombshell revelations, and the cables aren't really like that. If you want to get the most out of them, you have to focus on one country, one issue, and spend time going through thousands of cables and looking for, a narrative through it. So that's what I did. Reuters told me that they weren't going to publish the work in the end. So I resigned my job because I felt it was really important for this to be published. I thought that as a journalist, it's my job to tell the truth. And I was very uneasy about our coverage of Thailand, not just Reuters, but most of the media, not only because they don't tell the full truth because of the lèse majesté law, but they don't even usually admit that they can't tell the full truth. So, for example, when Reuters was writing a story about Thailand, I understand why they don't want to break Thai law, mm-hmm. but as far as I was concerned, they should at least have a line at the top of the story that says, this story is written under restrictions on information imposed by Thai law. And so, we're unable to discuss some of the, most important issues. So at least our audience would understand that there was a hidden part of the story. Mm-hmm. But Reuters was reluctant to do that. They didn't want to publish it. So I quit, which was a difficult decision because I'd been at Reuters for 17 years. It was my first real job. And obviously it's, I was already middle-aged. I was already I just turned 40. Mm-hmm. So this was, I guess, kind of my midlife crisis to suddenly find myself unemployed. Mm. And I guess the other immediate consequence was that, because I'd deliberately broken Thai law in quite a high-profile way, I became potentially a criminal in Thailand, and I can't go back. So I haven't visited Thailand since May 2011, because if I went there, I would be probably jailed.
What did you expose exactly at that time?
It was a complicated story, but to simplify, basically the palace and the royalist elite in Thailand have, throughout Thailand's modern history, they've been intervening in politics, they've been bringing down governments they didn't like, And they've been, often supporting military coups and military dictatorships. And we can see that right now in Thailand. There was a coup just last year. And the military, dictatorship that's now in place is largely supported by the royalist elite and the palace. But in Thailand for years, there'd been a denial that the palace had anything to do with politics. Everybody would say, that's just that the king has no real power. It's just ceremonial. And there was also, an attempt to kind of whitewash the king and his family as these amazing godlike figures, rather than acknowledge the fact that they're like all of us. They're kind of quite flawed human beings with strengths and weaknesses, and they've often been intervening in politics. And this fairy tale that you often hear about Thailand, about this wonderful, wise king and his charming family who work non-stop for the good of the country, that's not the full story. The palace has been intervening in Thai politics throughout history, and certainly throughout Thailand's modern history. And it's one of the reasons for the crisis that we have now, and the fact that Thailand keeps on slipping backwards into military rule. So I was trying to expose really the role of the palace in Thai politics, which all academics and scholars focusing on Thailand, they all recognized this for years, but nobody had ever really written it. Journalists felt they couldn't mention the political role of the palace. So that was why I think, the Thai crisis often seems so difficult to understand for outsiders, because when you read a news report about what's happening in Thailand, they very rarely mention anything about the palace. So, I wasn't trying to, expose, scandal and shocking things about the Thai royal family. There are some scandals about the Thai royal family that are interesting, and in particular, the fact that the current king shot his brother dead by mistake way back in 1946 to become king himself. It's a tragic story. I've done a lot of research on this, and as far as nobody knows for sure, but as far as I can tell, it was an accidental shooting. He was a young man, his brother was a young man, and they both enjoyed playing with guns. And if you play with guns, terrible things can happen. So there have been a few scandals like that I exposed, but it was mainly writing about the political role of the palace, which is something they've tried to keep hidden. And this is why the Thai elite really didn't like what I've done, and why they're still trying to enforce this lèse majesté law to try and hide their own political influence.
Monday Morning Matters. Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Were there any subsequent effect on your life in general, besides your job?
Yeah, there's been a lot of different effects. I get quite regular death threats, often on Facebook and Twitter, or by email, or sometimes phone calls. Now, I don't take them particularly seriously, because I think if somebody really wanted to kill me, they'd be really stupid if they sent me a Facebook message first, telling me they wanted to come and kill me. So I don't regard it as a serious threat, but it's really unpleasant. Since I published my work on Thailand and became a criminal in Thailand and became a whistleblower, I've got married and I have a son who's 2.5, and so often people send me messages, especially threatening my wife and son, which is difficult to deal with. I'll have to admit, it took me a while to learn to just try to ignore these kind of threats. If it's a serious threat, obviously I have to take it seriously, but often it's just an attempt to upset me. But I must admit, it does upset me to have people saying terrible things about my wife and son. I've had, also a lot of people on social media, especially Twitter, anonymous people, mostly, have written articles about me claiming that I'm, mentally ill, that I've been paid to do this, that I've got bad intentions towards Thailand, that I'm a foreigner who doesn't know anything. So when I saw the news recently about what's happening to the founder of the Sarawak Report, who's a British woman who was born in Malaysia and now lives in London. I really recognized a similar thing. She's being accused of being a foreigner who's trying to undermine Malaysia and damage Malaysia. That, she's been accused of being funded by dubious people, and she even says she's being followed and so on.
Yeah. She faced a lot of death threats for the Sarawak report founder Claire Roca's background.
Exactly. Yeah. So I recognize. I mean, a lot of similar things have happened to me in terms of, death threats. People people writing trying to discredit me, and because they didn't want to really challenge my argument, they didn't want to get into the debate about the real issues. They just accused me of being corrupt, of being an evil foreigner, or somebody who's mentally ill, and so on. So there's this attempt to discredit you. Mm-hmm. And I must admit, I was a bit naive when I knew it was going to be dangerous to do the work I'd done, but it's quite vicious. There's a lot of online attacks. And, in the past couple of years, I've started doing other jobs as well. I was lecturing at a university in Scotland, lecturing in journalism I've been doing that for the past several months. So people would try to contact the university to say that I should be fired. Things like people just really trying to damage me however they could. Mm-hmm. So that's been difficult to deal with, but I think it's a sign that you're doing your job. I mean, clearly powerful people feel threatened by my work.
So being a whistleblower is not an easy, I guess being a whistleblower itself, there's a lot of risk at stake that your life will forever change afterwards.
Exactly. It does change. And it's quite strange, there's a lot of people are very supportive of what whistleblowers do, but there is a lot of hostility and a lot of risk.
And the law itself also doesn't really protect you, especially in the region of Southeast Asia.
Exactly. The law is not really protection. Thailand has the lèse-majesté law. It also has very strict defamation laws. We've seen what happened to the Edge newspaper in Malaysia, mm-hmm. Which is printing documents that, I haven't seen anybody credibly say that these documents were not genuine, but nevertheless, the Edge has had to suspend publication, and its editors very bravely took the decision to do that, and I salute them. I mean, I think they're true journalists. They published what they needed to publish, and they took the consequences. And I remember reading a statement by the publisher of The Edge a couple of weeks ago, which I really respect. I thought it was very brave. Mm-hmm. But, this is what happens when you expose, especially, high-level corruption, because there's so much money at stake. In this Malaysian scandal, we're talking about billions of dollars that, potentially have been channeled to powerful people. In Thailand, it's also a huge amount of money at stake, because when the king dies, the royal succession will decide who that is then in control of the palace wealth. And the Thai monarchy is the richest in the world. It's worth more than $30 billion. And so there's a really vicious fight over who will control this money. Mm-hmm. And when you get people like me, an ordinary journalist, or people like the Edge in Malaysia or the Sarawak Report, ordinary people, getting involved in multi-billion-dollar corruption stories, obviously, there will be consequences, and you have to accept that. But I would say, I don't want to accentuate the negative, because although, the death threats and the harassment and the, abuse and the defamation that gets thrown at us is really unpleasant, at the same time, I've had lots of great support from a lot of ordinary people. Mm-hmm. And, some people have asked me, do I regret doing it? If I'd known how tough it was going to be afterwards, would I still have done it? And I think my answer is definitely yes, because, when I was a journalist at Reuters for 17 years when
17 years.
Yeah. And I'd been bureau chief in Baghdad. I'd been managing managing editor of the Middle East. So, I'd had some senior positions. And I was proud to be a journalist. I still am. And, when I had this big story, all these documents that I thought people needed to know, and I thought it would also do some real good to have this stuff exposed, because I thought we have to break this code of silence. And if when Reuters said to me they weren't going to publish it, if I just accepted that and said, okay, fine, I think I would have lost my self-respect. I wouldn't be able to look at myself in the mirror every morning when I'm brushing my teeth. I just think it was just totally against what I believe in and what I stand for. So even though it's, it has been difficult, I'm really glad I did it.
Is there any solidarity among journalists when it comes to whistleblowing? Because in the case of Malaysia, just recently there's a protest among journalists just to support for the government to suspend the license for the Age newspaper and also their sympathy towards or solidarity towards the Sarawak report. But in general, were there any solidarity among journalists towards the issue in Thailand?
In general, yes. As you know, especially in Southeast Asia, the media is very mixed, and a lot of the media is kind of indirectly controlled or influenced by the government. So that's true in Thailand, in Malaysia, and many other places. So you've got a lot of pro-government media who will attack you and denounce you. And also, there was a bit of hostility towards me from some foreign journalists based in Thailand, just because my work was implicitly a bit of a rebuke towards them, because I was basically saying journalists should have been reporting this stuff years ago, but they haven't been, so I'm doing it for the first time. So there's a little bit of tension about that, but in general, yes. Especially around the world, there's been really good support from other journalists, and it's led to a lot more opportunities, including talking to you at Durian ASEAN. I have found a lot of media organizations around the world have been, very, very willing to listen to the story, which is great.
Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
And regarding on the case of 1MDB, I want to go back to Malaysia now. Even investigators are being investigated, and whistleblowers are under scrutiny of government. Do you think ASEAN countries as a whole, including Thailand and a few other countries, they don't really put Whistleblower Protection Act as one of the most important act in either in ICHR or in the human rights framework or in national law itself?
Yeah, well, there's no real protection for whistleblowers in Southeast Asia. But, I don't think we should focus, it's not just a criticism of Southeast Asia. If you look at the United States, which supposedly does have whistleblower protections.
But it's still...
But if you look at what's happened to Edward Snowden,
and
to Bradley Manning, to Thomas Drake, who was a previous whistleblower, they've had an appalling time. And also in the United States, we've even seen journalists being investigated by the FBI, having their phone records tapped, being ordered to reveal their sources for confidential stories. And as you know, as investigative journalists, we need to be able to promise our sources that we will keep their information confidential. And when I'm writing about Thailand, I have some excellent sources whose lives would really be at risk if it was known that they were talking to me. So it's crucial for me to be able to promise to my sources that I'll never put them at risk. And in America, that's been, ignored again and again. So, the situation is pretty bad in Southeast Asia. There's not really so much of a tradition of independent journalism in a lot of Southeast Asian countries. And the government does its best to suppress this. In Malaysia, we've seen the Edge being shut down. We've seen the Sarawak Report site being blocked, and so on. But I think what's interesting is that in the 21st century, people can find ways to still see the site. They can find ways to get around the block if they're smart. they know the edge is being shut down, and the internet helps people, share a lot of information. So I think the balance of power is shifting a bit towards whistleblowers and towards ordinary people and against, the elites of these countries, because it's become much harder for them to control the story, even if they try to jail whistleblowers, shut down websites and so on. It's very hard for them to prevent this story, gathering pace.
But do you think governments, because it's getting harder for them to, especially in the era of social media, to capture whistleblowers and try to cover up the way some of their conducts that they don't want the public to know, but do you think they are getting more sophisticated or more repressive because of the world has become more open?
I think that's definitely true. We've seen it in Thailand with these terrible jail sentences that we discussed earlier. Also, recently, a company called Hacking Team had its own files hacked. Mm-hmm. Hacking Team was a firm based in Italy which sells software to governments to allow them to, surveil people and allow them to figure out who's criticizing them online and so on. And, Thailand was among several Southeast Asian countries who'd bought this software. And this software is really just to help try and control, and surveil people online. So it's we're seeing an escalating, technological arms race, I guess you could call it, where, because of the internet, ordinary people are becoming more powerful and governments are, often reacting, in a more and more repressive way. We had a case in Singapore recently, which it's not really whistleblowing, but a teenage guy, Amos.
MSE?
Who, he's a teenager. He's quite outspoken. He made some comments about the former minister mentor who died, this year, and about Christianity. And, many people might have been offended by his comments, but he was, as he was jailed. He's really been through a terrible ordeal. Mm-hmm. And it was quite remarkable that in a country that claims to be a modern country like Singapore, that a teenager would be put through this. So it really shows that governments in this region, they're still trying to control the narrative and control information, and it's getting harder for them. But as you say, in response, I think they're often becoming even more strict.
Monday Morning Matters.
Perspectives from Southeast Asia.
Nowadays, especially with all this technology, when you mentioned about the hacker team selling the latest gadgets on how to monitor your own citizen, I think these are areas that for the public, you're not getting enough information, especially the right kind of information from the government, but then you are being monitored because the government is scared that you might have certain ideas about them.
Absolutely. There is sophistication in terms of, tracking down who's been whistleblowing, who's been writing this kind of thing. And then there's also sort of very old-fashioned and unsophisticated methods to deal with people, which is the death threats, the harassment, the abuse, a lot of which is done kind of, informally. Obviously, at some stage, the government sometimes have to arrest people, and at that stage, actually can amplify the story. So it's slightly dangerous for a government to formally charge or arrest a whistleblower. And I think that's why they use a lot of these dirty tricks, where you have, people's reputations being trashed with fake stories about them. You have death threats, you have harassment of their family and so on. Because this is a way for them to kind of, deter whistleblowing and damage whistleblowers without having to formally, charge them and so on. So there's a lot of very old-fashioned dirty tricks, and there's also some very modern surveillance technology. So it's a combination of both.
It's easier for whistleblowers to operate outside of the country that they are focusing on, like in Malaysia. Sarawak Report is based in London, and of course you are based outside of Thailand. But what about those journalists who want to expose issues in their own country that is unfavorable to the government of the day. How can they go about it, and how can they ensure that they are being protected?
I mean, as you say, it's very difficult, and I have the advantage that I chose not to go back to Thailand, and the Sarawak report, they're based outside Malaysia. But at the same time, it's true of me, and I think it's certainly true of the Sarawak report, that we couldn't do the work we do without information from many people inside of the countries that we report on. So in a sense, I'm now, I'm getting the benefit of many Thai whistleblowers who speak to me anonymously. And they're really the reason I'm able to do the work that I do. I think for journalists in a place, place like Thailand or Malaysia who want to expose government corruption, it's really hard for bloggers and freelance independent journalists and so on, because they don't really have the legal or institutional support, and the government will come after you. For people who work for established media, if the owners of that media are courageous, then they can do great work. And, that's why we saw the Edge doing great work, and the owners have been prepared to accept the consequences and be shut down. Mm-hmm. And it remains to be seen what happens in the longer term to the Edge, and whether it comes back stronger, which I hope it does, or if it goes out of business. But I would hope that, enough people in Malaysia respect the work that they did to support them, and so they come back stronger, because I think it would be a real pity if we start seeing campaigning publications. And I mean, the Edge wasn't even really a campaigning publication, but they just, they believed in reporting the story when they saw it. And if we see that kind of courageous journalism penalized, it could have a chilling effect on our people trying to tell them stories. So I really hope it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm. With that, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing with us.
Thanks, Arlene. It was a pleasure to talk to you.